Oh, yes.
So we're Sunday morning, January 29th or 19th, which happens to be my daughter who died 2 years ago, or a year ago, December's 45th birthday today. So 45 years ago, I remember her being born and brought into the world. And,
Well, sorry about that.
I got a letter from one of the women that she had gotten out of prison and talked about the effort that she made and the extraordinary commitment she made to the details, and approached the parole board like nobody else had ever approached them. And the hearings normally were an hour and a half, and she turned them into 4 hours because she did not miss a point, stood there to recognize every available option that she had, and was fully prepared when she did that. But in a sense, she was a freedom fighter. And if you think of that term, it can be taken in both directions. You're either fighting freedom or you're fighting for freedom. And in the fighting for freedom, we're often fighting within the context of a fight that we can never win, because it's a mental struggle within the context of a mental struggle, being considered the only reality we have, rather than noticing that freedom is at the heart of our nature, which allows us the chance to make these decisions that seem to condemn us, when in fact it's the decision we're making that is condemned from the beginning. And to speak honestly about this is to begin to notice the potential, to notice that, and not stop it and fight it, but notice it and embrace it and say, oh, this impulse exists in me somehow for some reason. And I don't need to know the reason or understand it at all to notice that it's happening, to notice that I feel compelled to react, to fight for my position, to fight for my life, to fight for my ideas, rather than see there is no fight in reality whatsoever, because there are no pieces or parts to fight over. It's a seamless, symmetrical, perfectly balanced essence that is the nature of nature, and it is our nature too. Essence can't be an essence if it isn't essential to all living things. And our life forms that we're living aren't actually life. They are products of possibilities of life, as to all the plants, minerals, all matter, etc. The entire universe is filled with this evidence. So if we're thinking about thinking as our source, we're thinking unnaturally about that source. And as a result, we think the only wisdom we have is to keep thinking more and more about it to get it right, rather than see that nature itself has its own wisdom, already has its own innate knowing, has allowed everything to be as it is right now. And if I'm relying on that, the ideas that would have otherwise seemed impossible and impractical and preposterous begin to occur, because I'm no longer obliterating my insight and my ability to see what's happening by acting oblivious to it. It becomes obvious. It starts to become well lit, because the lightness of being, the light of being, meaning a light that will always extinguish darkness or shadows, begins to be utilized, rather than constantly reutilizing the thinking about the thinking about the thinking about the thinking about the thinking. That is an echo chamber that feels like solitary confinement and creates trauma in our experience, and anxiety and stress, which undermine our body's ability to function. So we're here to talk about that. Now, I would not say that is an easy conversation. I would say the conversation is easy, but within the context of the thinking we normally do about it, it becomes very difficult and complicated, because that reliance on the thinking seems so sure, when in fact the doubt in that thinking is absolutely just as assured. So this can be a stretch. And I know for listeners that it doesn't always seem to make sense, but if reality is reality, it doesn't need sense to be made of it. The question is, why do we keep making so little sense and make believe that more of that same lack of sense is
There's
going to
that we
someday
there
add
again,
up?
though. We. Can we just take a moment to appreciate you, Jack, and your daughter, Silence? How beautiful that nature is and perfect.
Well, but I would say we all share that, Anthony. And she too now is a part of that in a way that doesn't have the form, but the substance remains, the essence remains.
And for
And
the
if we,
listeners, that's the second time I made that mistake, right? It is we, because it doesn't have to be I all the time.
well, ultimately, the capital I is we. That's the ultimate
Yes.
self.
You should be an attorney. Think about what a great attorney you would be.
So you're setting my example as being an attorney?
Of what not to do. You're either an example of what to do or what not.
You are an attorney.
No, I can't
So
actually. I am not for record. But I just want to say, take a moment. Let's not talk past that. Let's just take silence for what you
we're
just
not,
said.
Anthony, we're not talking past it. We're talking with it. We're all part of it. The
Yes.
idea is that we leave it behind, suggests there's a behind to leave it in, and
Yes.
it's always present. That totality is always here. It doesn't
And
make
it's
it,
how we deal with it. That's what you said so perfectly. It's not happening anymore. It's only how you're dealing with it right now.
well, so that's what's happening.
Yes. Apparently everything. Apparently everything.
So if there's any tribute that we have to those we say have gone, have left, it would be in noticing not only the inevitability of that physical death that comes to each and all of us, but also the other harms we create in the process that could be obviously eliminated if we weren't busy maintaining ideas that were corrupt and had no basis in reality. Thinking about thinking itself is based in thinking. Now, thinking is actually a product of reality. But if what I'm choosing to do with it is act as though it's the only reality I have, I'm taking something that's imagined, a story that I tell about what's happening, and turning it into a very long narrative that acts like a film. It's a projection of a film that I think is real. And I see the world based on that. I see the people in it based on that. I see existence in life based on that. But existence in life is not based on the ability I have to imagine it. It already has an absolute basis before I ever started imagining. So my imagination is a product of it. And to begin to see thoughts as imagined allows the chance to begin to actually dispel the rumors, which I would say are the cultural ideas that I have, the belief systems that I think my life depends on maintaining, and start to allow those that light and start to dissipate in terms of feeling that they have any matter or matter whatsoever. Those are just decisions I make about what matters. And that weight I carry in relation to those things isn't real. It's just a dream I'm having that I'm carrying a weight. And so in the dream, it feels very, very heavy and it feels very backbreaking and it feels very difficult. It feels very complicated to think about living that way. And that daydream is not something that's unusual for any of us. To the degree that I maintain an idea is true, that is not true, I have an inner conflict and emotional turmoil and mental anguish that is inexhaustible to the degree that I maintain that idea. It will operate on the basis of that conflict and that anguish and that turmoil every time, all the time. And I would suggest that's present traumatic stress. And the trauma is supposedly something that happened in the past I can't get over, but it is what I'm doing with that seeming past in the present that I am struggling with. The impact of this moment is where things occur to me and cause that are caused by me. It isn't back there somewhere. It's what I'm thinking about it now. If I had amnesia about that time in history, the chances are I would not be struggling with that seeming issue back there, but I use it as an excuse to justify why I'm not going to be honest about what's happening now. And that's the sorrow, Anthony. And I have that sorrow. To the degree that I do those things, I feel sorry, but feeling sorry is simply an admission of my own sorrow and grief and mourning for the loss of the potential I have to speak to and in this moment in the fullest possible way that would easily be conveyed if I were doing it well enough for people to say, oh, I know that too. I know that because I know that. Sometimes in talking about these grand ideas, it seems improbable and impractical, but there is no great practicality in making believe that something wrong is right and thinking the more I think about it, it will become easier and less complicated. Nature is natural. It has a knowing sense that seems to allow everything that's happening to be happening right now. And that wisdom is the inspiration of intuition. It's the natural state of our knowingness that our thoughts are designed to express, rather than have this interruption of a feedback loop about thinking more about the thinking I'm doing and thinking more about that thinking and now thinking it's the only thing I can do. That's exactly what defines an addiction. I
And
can't do anything
what
else.
happens, Jack, when AI becomes smarter than the person? And eventually in 20 years, the AI will be more intelligent, right?
I will only say that it's interesting that humans who created that are now afraid of it and not notice that the artificial intelligence we've been basing our
Yeah.
own cultural ideas on
Yeah.
is now being blamed on something else that we claim to be out of our control. It's pretty clever of us, once more, to use something we actually created as justification for claiming we have nothing to do with it and we're going to be out of control of it. It's a
Yeah.
metaphor for the exact same thing we're talking about. And the woman that I talked to, Jan Schwartzman, I believe it was, who coined the term authentic intelligence, seeing that there is a knowing nature and it does exist and it is pure and it is healthy and sane. It isn't another insane idea launching off to prove that we can control something that's crazy, when in fact there is no control in nature. It's already here, it's already full, it's already complete. That concession, simply conceding that to begin with, is the ability to try these things out, consider these things, contemplate that that may be true, and then rely on that seeming truth, even though it might seem preposterous. Just say, well, if it's true, it's true. If reality is reality and it's true, it would be true. And start operating on that basis. So you try it and rely on it and apply it. And the application of that starts to have things very different in our experience, because we're not using this sole isolated interreactive source. We're starting to allow that light to shine through us, and it becomes very obvious that that nature is something we can be very thankful and grateful for, because we're not producing it in thought. We're simply expressing something that's always been in existence with present thought. It's always now, it's always here, it's never there, it's never then, it's never them, it's now, it's us. Each of us individually as the collective, we that we are.
That was very well said, Jack.
Well, there's silence too, Anthony. If you notice that if there's a point people are considering, they tend to be quiet because they're literally considering it. And that is considerate. It's receptive. And communication always requires a receiver. It's like the old idea that the tree that falls in the forest isn't heard if somebody isn't there. The resonance of that falling is
Yeah.
probably there, but the hearing of it and the way we
Yeah.
hear it may not be there, because the ears designed to do what our ears do
Yeah.
hear it in the way ears are designed.
What about this as a theory, Jack? People hear what they want to hear.
Well, they say what they want to say too.
Yeah, they say what they want to say and they hear what they want to hear. And you can't change that.
Well, it's changing all the time, Anthony. If
That's
it's a
what I mean. You can't
process,
change that. It's the changing all the time. You can't change that.
but it's changing all the time. So
Right.
you are changing.
I'm teasing you, buddy.
We're the idea that things are changing all the time doesn't mean we like the change that we're making. And that's a very different thing to
Yeah.
talk about.
And
Not
Darwin's
like,
theory works in reverse. It always doesn't move forward, right? It's not always the right. It works the other way too. Doesn't work sometimes.
so here's a quote I sent to someone this week on that point, Anthony. It is just as likely that as I invent what I want to say, you will invent what you want to hear. Jeanette Winterson.
She obviously had kids, right?
So coming to terms, words are limited. They don't identify, they identify the words we use and the definitions we have assigned to those words. They don't define the thing we're talking about. They're just words we use to reference that thing.
Yeah.
If that thing we're talking about has a common basis between us, even if it's an illusion or a delusion, then we each know what that basis is, because we couldn't relate to it if we didn't. We couldn't assign words to it. We couldn't wonder about it. We wouldn't talk about it if we didn't have a knowingness of it. It would not seem to make any sense whatsoever, just as someone speaking a foreign language amongst us, we know they're talking. We know they're talking about something. We don't know what they're talking about or the thing they're talking about. We have no basis for connection in that. But we know they're talking. We know they're referencing something. We know they know what they're saying because they're saying it so fluidly and so eloquently without having any understanding on our part. It's the same thing we do with the idea that our perception is reality and thus don't think anyone else sees it our way. And as a result, they don't share our reality. That's just an overstatement of what reality is. Reality is not my perception or how I think of things. Reality is the essence of my ability to make choices.
Right. And reality doesn't need you to define it, right?
Well, you tell me.
I like when you say that. Well, reality doesn't really need you to define it for it.
Well, if something is real that would be true, there's no definition in it. It's just an essence that's essential. And if that is the essence of existence, then there seems to be a knowing. I don't want to say must be because I don't want to condemn anyone to their thinking or my thinking. But I want to suggest that if there's a knowingness that has allowed everything that's happening to be happening, it seems to have an order to it that's fairly well recognized to have people studying it and still not being able to understand it. And the best minds on the planet today are still looking for answers. We've been looking for answers, but we've sort of been avoiding the things that we can say factually. We're looking for the what, why, where, when, and how, while in fact that it's happening is overlooked. That we are is overlooked. That things are as they are is overlooked. And I would suggest, if we have any interest in mental stability, that beginning with that, rather than what, where, when, how, and why, which seems to be questions that have never been answered because we still keep asking them. And there seems to be this idea that questioning things is wise. And I would say questioning questionable things is unwise. It's getting to the root of the questionable question that would be a lot more, that would actually be an answer worth resolving something or dissolving something rather than this constant resolution of trying to come to terms with something that's already, life's terms are already described.
Are you saying look at a bigger picture instead of trying to focus on some minute detail that you can argue about, but agree on the big picture?
To a degree, but the big picture isn't even a picture. It's an essence that is not definable within time and space. So
and that's why I keep coming back every week, listeners. The picture isn't, spoiler alert, the picture isn't really a picture.
Well, it's an image.
It's an image.
We're creating a picture because that's what thoughts do. And the purpose of thoughts is to help our body function in the direction of survival and thriving. Survive and thrive is the direction. Why? Because it promotes life. And if life is, in fact, an absolute state of being, then it certainly isn't promoting death. And certainly the death that we all experience here is really a temporal experience of death, just like the fear we have of letting go of the idea of ego has us face the fear built into this thing we call ego that we think is us and we think is fearful, that we think facing it means fear, but in fact the thing is filled with fear because it has no basis. When we assign these ideas we have about self as being reality, we are afraid immediately because we know that we're not the creators of reality. We know that reality has been created for us to act in ways that are insane and delusional. We know that the basis of the ego as we use the term today is the basis of a false self that has no basis. And to think of it as something to overcome is once again to think there's something to overcome. So it reinforces the idea it's real and it's separate from us and it's acting on us and doing something we can't control. And that's exactly what anyone who's addicted to any substance says. I have no
Maybe it's just
control over
loop
it.
problem. Maybe if you have that thought one time, it's okay and it passes. I think problem I sometimes get into where it becomes a loop, and I think that thought just maybe too many times and reoccurs like every day. Like that's the problem.
That's the obsession, Anthony.
Yeah, that's the loop.
Well, it isn't really a loop. It's an insistence that you continue to defend against and defy and deny your culpability for
Oh,
maintaining an
yeah.
idea that isn't true.
And let me just mention something, Jack. I realized this a couple of days ago. It's okay when your brain is just looking at things for me. When I say, oh, that's a nice picture, it's a nice surfboard, it's a problem when my brain starts thinking things like, should that surfboard be there or on this side? Do I really like that painting? Or could another painting? That's where I have to turn off the analyzation part of my brain. It's okay to look at things and say, oh, that's a something, but it's when I start analyzing it, that's my problem. I finally realize that it's not that I look at things that's a problem or thing. It's when I start picking them apart and not realizing I'm in analyze mode. That's all I do. I don't look at anything. I
Well,
analyze.
it's what your brain is designed to do.
Yeah, but I have to realize that's what it's doing. As long as I realize, okay, we're in analyzation mode, then I'm like, okay, let's analyze. But if I don't even realize it's analyzing and it's throwing loops at me, it's stupid.
But think of the way you're talking about your brain throwing loops at you.
Yeah, that's
you
what it does. Because that's who
hang
else?
on,
Yeah,
Anthony.
yeah, I know what you're saying.
I doubt it, or you wouldn't be saying what you're saying.
I love the honesty. Let's get honest.
Well, if you were thinking of this accurately, you would be seeing that you were the one asking your brain to do something
No,
that
it's
it
we.
can't
Now I'm
do.
into we. We're the one. It's not me. It's we. It's
Do you want me to
connected.
talk to you about this directly, Anthony, or do you want to go off on another tirade?
Sorry.
You're speaking in terms of your brain doing loops as though it's independent of you. That is an irresponsible approach to looking at what you're doing.
Does Gabe realize it? Gabe, do you feel that way too, or no?
Anthony, you just asked me to focus
I
on
know, but
you.
I'm wondering if Gabe feels that way too.
Anthony, don't distract this. You're capable of it. We all know that. You asked to have some attention. I'm going to give you that attention. So stick with the attention you're asking for. All right. If you want to talk about this, talk about it. And don't dissect it and don't jump off into all those different. You can do those things, but that's not what I'm here to do. So I'm going to do what I can, draw your focus.
Okay, doctor, go ahead.
Now, I'm not a doctor, and I don't have any interest in that. I'm simply telling you that if you're interested in an answer to these questions that you repeatedly come back with, repeatedly, and if you hear them and start listening and consider them, you're going to start dissipating that tendency without having to think about it at all.
And that's why I want to know if Gabe, I want to know if this is off subject or not. Does Gabe have the same problem too, or is this off?
It's off subject because the subject right now is you.
No,
Anthony.
I think Gabe has it too, though.
I haven't been listening.
I knew it. That's what I was with. The truth is beautiful.
The
Anthony.
noise just hurts my ears. So.
Do you start to overanalyze things, Gabe? That's the question. Do you start
Anthony, you're distracting from this conversation. You said you wanted to deal with this.
If you think you're too involved,
if you don't need to drown him simultaneously. If you're interested in looking at what you're saying and look at the words you're using, you're talking about your brain doing loops as though it's independent of your choices to ask it to do that. This all comes down to making believe that our thinking is, in fact, reality, to think of it as something that happens to us rather than to think of it as responding or reacting to the questions or the actions we are posing to it. You're the poser of those questions. You are asking your brain to go into loops because it can't deal with what you're asking for.
Oh,
It doesn't
okay. I was thinking you didn't know, but you're right. That's what it is.
It doesn't have an independent mind of its own any more than the ego. Listen to the way modern conversation talks about ego. My ego got the best of me. Think about it. We're talking about it as though it's independent of us. And what we're admitting in that statement, my ego got the best of me, is that this is the best I can do. This is just it. I've given up having any greater hope whatsoever in anything whatsoever. So I rely on hopelessness and faithlessness and an untrustworthy ego that I think now is acting against me and not in favor of me, because it's just this silly little thing that does this stuff.
And the scary part is it says, and don't ever tell anybody about this, or there's going to be a punishment. Right? It has that little like.
If you talk about it openly,
don't ever tell anybody about this.
If you talk about it openly, others have a chance to begin to look at the fact that that's what we have been doing collectively. I don't want to speak for everybody and say that everybody does that, but I would say everybody I've ever come across, everybody I've ever talked to about this does it. So in that limited scope, I'm going to launch off to a little more than the limited scope of my own experience and suggest that this has been a cultural problem for as long as people have thought that righteous indignation allowed for the oppression, suppression, and killing of other people because they didn't think the way we did. It's happened through history.
Yeah. And this is where humor makes everything soft. See, the humor lightens it up. If you just talk about these negative things.
If you thought the Holocaust was humorous, I would say you're dismissing the impact of the sickness and the illness and the sick potential we have to cause great harm to other members of our own species. You don't have a species on this planet that does this. I mean, cancer may be a good example of it. And I think that quote from, I forget his name, Dr. Bush, that was talking about the fact that cancer, the way he described cancer is exactly the way that the seeming self seems to operate, as though it's alone, separate. It starts feeding off of more of the same thinking that more of the same is going to get better. The cancer cell actually replicates itself and it's killing the host. It's going to kill the host. Cancer has to have a host to survive. What do? Suicide. We kill the body with the brain to think we'll stop the thinking, rather than notice it just means facing the thoughts we're having is not true, not real, not accurate. They're not plaguing us. We're asking them to continue to do that. That's pretty sick. That is insane, to ask our body to do what it can't do and then blame the body as though we have nothing to do with it. It's exactly textbook addiction.
Well, how about if you're a kid and your parents finally tell you, hey, listen, we've been lying to you all these years. There really is no Santa. And the whole thing was made. It's like, but you need to deal with that now and move on to your net, right? That's a heavy thing to tell a kid, that we've been lying to you.
Forgetting about kids and thinking now about you being here now and asking for attention. Notice that you do that in your own wishful thinking and your own hopeful thinking and your own fantastic ideas about how to escape this dilemma.
Wow, you're so
rather
right.
than embrace it. Just embrace it, which means embracing something is having something.
Wow, I like that.
In Alcoholics Anonymous, we're asked to let go absolutely. Interestingly, to let go absolutely is to truly admit that we've not been hanging on to anything, but that there was something to hang on to in our thinking. That's the absolute part of that. There hasn't been anything in insanity to hang on to, except the idea that it was real and true. How could insanity be real and true if we were creating it as a justification to claim we had nothing to do with it?
Yeah.
That's a sickness. That is a mental sickness. And the chemicals that our body induces, the emergency chemicals, the overuse of adrenaline and dopamine to feel these instant gratification of these little wins that we think we're doing, are actually depleting our well-being, the well-being of our body's capacity to function at a level that feels to us like it's worth continuing to have.
Is it possible that ego is made up? Like, what if there really is no ego? Everybody has a definition. Nobody knows what it is. What if there really is no ego?
Well, the definition of ego is I, capital I, The actual self and the way we use it is a definition of a false self. So think of that.
Oh yeah, you're right.
If a lie is only trying to be what it isn't, so if it's true, it's trying to be false, and if it's false, it's trying to be true. It's
Yes.
only trying to be the opposite.
Yeah.
What have we turned in our thinking? All these other things. We've turned unnatural behaviors into what we call human nature.
Yeah.
We've turned ego into a self we can't do anything about and can't stop. Now we've given it life.
Ego is kind of the lie that you tell yourself.
Yes.
That's what
It's
it is, right? Ego is the lie you tell
personification.
yourself. Yes.
It's a personification that we claim is acting against us rather than something we're causing to discount and try and be
Yeah.
irresponsible for our choices.
And ego is what keeps it. When everybody tells you, "Oh, you're crazy, you're wrong," ego is like, "Oh no, it's okay, Anthony. You're doing the right thing." That's the thing, that the denial switch,
But
right?
Anthony,
Ego.
forgetting everyone else for a moment,
Yeah.
look at the words you're saying in terms of something we've been talking about for years, and you coming to start to, it's dawning. Think of the word dawning. The sun is coming up.
Yeah.
The light is beginning to shine. If this is dawning on you now, it might be worth slowing down a little bit and noticing all the impulses you have to run away from this are all coming from that basic root idea that you're at risk, because the thinking you're doing about the you think you are
Yes.
is in fact it isn't full of shit. It's actually shit as a waste product is what we use as a term to define the absolute waste of time we are doing, and the mourning we have and the sorrow we have for missing the potential of the moments, the full potential of the moments that are our responsibility.
And in a way, this is analysis too. That's the reason I like your show so much, because all it does is analyze everything. We don't ever look at something and say, "Hey, let's look at this bowl of fruit and just look at it." We're like, let's analyze everything. Right?
I would not suggest that's what we're here to do, but begin to concede that if there is a knowing nature that is absolute, that is ever present, that is always here, it would be worth mentioning in our thinking, suggesting to our thinking that that may be true, instead of constantly having obsessive thoughts come up with new obsessive thoughts to try to create reality that will never be real and never be true. This is the difference between looking at our experience accurately or inaccurately and thinking that the inaccuracy is accurate, so that misperception becomes perception and misunderstanding becomes our understanding, and a lack of nature becomes what we call human nature. And if you think of the way people define human nature, typically, often, it's greed, everyone's out for themselves, all those sorts of things are defining an egoistic self that is desperate because it has no basis in reality. And we are doing everything we can to make it seem real by creating circumstances to warrant, manifesting circumstances that are ugly, hateful, spiteful, and contemptful to warrant it's the only thing we can do. Everybody does it. What else am I left to do?
Yeah. And what's funny is this might not make sense to anybody listening, but go one day without coffee. And then this is like, I totally get what Jack was saying. You know that feeling when you haven't had coffee for a while and you're like, you start exactly the way you're feeling. And then you have coffee and you're like, oh my God, this is great. You know what I mean?
I don't think coffee is the absolute source of reality.
Try going a little while without it, right? And then that's what it's like. This show is about coffee. Coffee is amazing.
Anthony, you're a good example of the degree and depth that an individual will go to divert and distract from the conversation. You're coming on these points and making them and then running in all these other
well, because I didn't want to waste Gabe said he's not even listening, it's hurting his ears. I mean, I'm not, he's saying he doesn't like what I'm saying is what he can't say it, but that's what he's saying. So I don't like,
who really doesn't like what you're saying, Anthony, is your experience. You've been doing it so long, so confidently, so laughingly, that you thought it was funny, but I don't think it's funny to you at all.
I know, and that's why I was actually saying I didn't want to just not come to the show anymore. I'm like, because you're supposed to say, okay, I'm not. I wanted to apologize and say I don't like having conflict,
So you
Otherwise,
don't
it's
have to
my
apologize to us. We've already got our own levels of sorrow.
okay. Gabe would have said, "Oh my God, this is exactly what I was thinking." I'd be like, "Yeah, let's go." But when Gabe's like, I'm not even listening. It's hurting my ears." I'm like, "Okay,
I don't like what you're saying, Anthony,
well,
there.
right. Well, that's fine. Then say it. But that's fine. So I won't say it anymore. I
It's like
apologize.
watching an alcoholic at a bar continue to drink and continue to drink. Yeah, I can see, can hear with every word the struggle, the fight, the give up, the avoidance, moments of clarity back to another drink, another
It's
round
illuminating. It's illuminating, Anthony.
yes.
It's actually illuminating. But so too is every other defective approach everyone else is taking on a regular basis. And I would say that that has become more common amongst humans than stopping and beginning to say, wow, I have been at the center of this experience and I have been contributing to the delinquency of all the others who are having this experience by making believe the only thing I can do is continue to do the thing that has no basis in reality and think someday it will get better and excuse it in the meantime by thinking everyone else does it. Why don't I just continue? How could I be so wise to see that and yet continue in a direction that continues to complicate and reinforce insanity in society and not stop and say, maybe my lack of participation in that would be much more beneficial than my continued acquiescence to it as being the only thing I can do. Through human history, there have been times when people started thinking collectively differently. And why? Because somebody introduced an idea, and I'm not suggesting that's me. It preceded me by 100 and some years in terms of the process of what Alcoholics Anonymous came into, the idea of actually helping people recover that it historically for thousands of years thought of as hopeless. Alcoholism through history has been, people were considered insane, unworthy of being parts of society. They were killed and imprisoned and isolated and sent off to what were like leper colonies to get rid of them because nobody knew what to do with them. That mentality must also be in the midst of the people who don't know what to do with them, to think the best thing they can do with them is throw them away, rather than say, this is part of our race. This is part of our species. There's a guidance system here that might be offering us something on a collective basis that's a little deeper and a little more profound than simply not drinking. Because they do that thing I don't do anything they do. That would be a glaring oversight. And I would say that's been pretty consistent with the whole concept of addiction. It's been thought of just as a symptomatically based problem. And here's another point to the point earlier. If a lie is only trying to be what it isn't, all we've done historically is tried to treat the symptom and say that we've recovered. And yet we've known the whole time that the symptom is not the problem, but the disease itself, the cause is the problem. And that cause is a mental cause. It isn't a dysfunction of reality. It's a dysfunction of mentality. It's what we choose that causes that, each of us. And to choose it collectively and think there's nothing we can do about it is a pretty convenient sort of riot or conspiracy or any of the number of words that would suggest something that people have no control over when it happens collectively. And I would guarantee you we have absolute control because we each have the freedom to think whatever we want. If we can think we have absolutely no control and need to be led to the slaughter by all other humans doing the same thing, certainly we're pretty free in our ability to think. If we can think the sickest thing is the only thing, that's a pretty good indication that we have an absolute source of freedom in the thinking we do. We could reduce ourselves to nothing in our own thinking. That's a pretty good indication that we are free to think the fullness is also absolutely our nature. Easy to lose that, though, in the midst of all the complications and the pettiness and all of the backbiting and turmoil and all the stuff that we get embroiled with in our own deficiencies and our own existence. But it doesn't diminish them. It's just another way of making believe that dancing around them is somehow fun and exciting, when it's just a delusion. It's just a delusional attempt to make believe that something that isn't happening is all that's happening. and all that is happening becomes nothing. How better to feel alone, to feel apart from, to feel less than, to feel no self-worth, to feel low self-esteem. All of those would be natural consequences of that thinking, and I would say they all indicate that within society today. In addition to the fact that we call all the anxious problems disorders and don't realize, well, what is the order? What's the natural order if these are disorders? Well, life's terms would be a natural order, whatever they are. They don't seem to change when we want to fly an airplane and all of a sudden don't have two wings and wonder why the plane's crashing. Life's terms don't change. It's our functional capacity or incapacity that's changing. So I would suggest that the ultimate elevation of spirit, the intuition, the wisdom, the absolute inspiration of life is expressing life. And knowing that if life's terms are absolutely intact, it wouldn't take a lot to figure that out if I stop preoccupying myself with so many distractions that I'm addicted to make believe I have nothing to do with what's happening and start to actually interact with all that is happening that's always been happening the whole time I was delusionally making believe it wasn't. Very different approach to function. It becomes proactive. So problems are noticed and addressed rather than pushed aside and not wanted. And it's just another thing I've got to get over and past. The problems we have are the indications of our awareness that something is wrong. And to think of them as something to get over for the wrong's the wrong. It just complicates it, like you were talking about, Anthony. Once you start analyzing it and you know you're analyzing it and you continue to analyze it thinking that more analyzation is going to get you there. If you've already misanalyzed it and you're adding more analyzation to it, where's it going to go? It's what obsessive thoughts are. Obsessive thoughts are maintaining lies that we think will someday be true the longer we maintain them. Yeah. So we have hope. We have hope in a future that never exists, and we absolutely lack hope in a present that always exists. We take away our potential, and it's only our functional, our human potential, our functional capacity that we're really undermining. The ability to do better for each other and our own experience is how we're designed. We're not designed to do it all well for ourselves so we can wall ourselves off and hope nobody attacks us or breaks through the walls. But look at human history. That's how we've operated a lot of times. It's to create a social situation that is healthy, that looks at social ills as a social problem, honestly, rather than think about isolating people and blaming them and faulting them and thinking of them as the odd man out, when for us to do that is to indicate the same sickness that we're claiming they are is unique to them. It's identical in a different version. It's another perversion of a new version, a new story we tell to make believe that somehow or another it'll be true one day, some new fantasy fairy tale.
I think the problem is when you can't like when everybody tells you you're wrong and you're like, oh, you're not, you're wrong. But the problem is when you really look at yourself and go, you know what? Everybody was right. I am right. That's where it doesn't work anymore. You're like, oh, holy shit, we got a
But
problem.
you know it all along, Anthony. It's just the time it takes for us to
You
come to
know it, but you
terms.
don't really know it. You know that point where you go, you know what?
No, you
Everybody's
know it, and you really know it, and you think you
yeah.
don't know it. The time it takes to come to terms with any of this is
Yeah.
equal to the denial and the defiance and the defense
Yeah.
that we've been mustering and thinking that that's the management style for life.
Yeah. There's a
That what
speaker
I'm
I
going to
like.
do is I'm going to go numb to it and I'm going to act oblivious and I'm
Yeah.
going to say, I didn't know.
They're
I
doing it
just
to
didn't
me. It
know.
just happened. It just makes, I didn't have a choice. It just, my mind. But there's a speaker who says that a lot of times it's like being pregnant. Everybody else around the person knows they're pregnant, but the person sometimes they don't know they're pregnant, but everybody else knows.
Well, it's interesting that we think we know so well for others while we're struggling with our own plight.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't see others as something we knew. We wouldn't see the wrong in others the way we do when
Yeah.
we're when we were admitting the wrong we're doing. we would see that they're doing exactly what we're doing, and that we have a camaraderie and a connection in that that's simultaneous and absolute and worthy of connection, because we're actually now seeing the cooperative advantage we have in sharing what we have and what we've learned in the best way, so that everyone has a chance to notice that we actually share that same way.
Do you think this tuning fork, they give you an example of a tuning fork and it rings the other tuning fork because it's got the same, what do you say? It seems to make sense, right? This energy.
I don't know who they are. And, you know,
Well,
I
have you
think,
ever seen that where you ring a tuning fork at a certain frequency and then the other tuning fork rings next to it because it's catching that
but you're
frequency?
stimulating a resonance within space.
Have you seen those things they do?
If you throw a rock in a pond and you throw another rock in the pond, the ripples are going to overlap.
Well, but I mean with energy, this tuning fork is sending out a certain wave and the other tuning fork hears that wave. I think
so is a rock sending out energy when it lands in a pond. Just a different description of the same thing, Anthony. We're in a universe that's fully defined by its own function. It's fully defined. We don't need to understand. We don't need to put words to it.
What if you throw a tuning fork into a pond? How about that one? Do you like that?
Same thing. But the ripple's going to be noticed just as the ripples of your own actions are noticed and affecting everyone else. We talk about wanting to make a difference while we're always making a difference. We talk about wanting change while we're always changing. It's the fact is we don't like the change. We don't like the difference we're making, and we know it. To make believe that somehow or another, all of a sudden change isn't happening until we make it. Think of that. Think of how willing we are to deny how things actually function in the name of making believe that they're not actually happening the way they're happening.
I have actually done that. For everybody listening, I am.
Oh, you don't need to mention it to anyone.
I have actually done that.
You don't need to mention that. Anthony, we're all aware we're aware.
No, I don't know about that one. Yeah, that's a big statement. I think that's the problem.
No. The fact that we think we're not aware and we think we don't know what we know does not mean we're not aware and we don't know what we know.
Yeah, good point.
It's again, using thinking as our source. Thinking
that's the subconscious. Is that subconscious?
Oh,
yeah.
It isn't subconscious if it's acting on us. We use that term as though we don't know. That's just another excuse. How could it be acting on us? How could the ego be acting out of control if egos are specific to the individual? We're making the whole thing up as an excuse to blame our own choices and responsibility. We are absolutely each responsible and collectively responsible because in an absolute state, there are no options. There are all of the things that we think within addiction condemn us in an absolute state don't condemn us at all because there is no lack.
The part I'm struggling with is the difference between ego and superego. I just don't see, like, what really, you got ego and then superego. What is the difference?
Again, you're trying to think thinking will get you to a place. Ego is a word. Ego we use now is a word for false self. If we know it's a false self, why do we keep trying to make it true? Why would it be false if we weren't doing something to perpetuate the falsehood and not notice that maybe if I no longer start doing the thing I do to maintain the falsehood would disappear and the awareness of that truth, that self, the actual essence of what we all share would become a lot more obvious.
So then do you believe in UFOs? Do you think that UFOs are actually...
if they are, they are. I don't need to have an opinion about things for those things to be. The freedom comes in I don't need to further analyze from misanalyzation and think I'm going to get anywhere.
Yeah. My friend told me the other day.
I do. I'm not saying that I don't. I do.
Yeah. But you don't have to believe in it.
I notice the conflicts that come and the disturbances that come are coming from my greater awareness that I'm doing something that's wrong.
What do you think of the statement? My friend said this. He goes, Anthony, sometimes the key to life is knowing when to stay out of it.
That's thinking about life, again, from the physical standpoint. It's only there when we do something.
Ooh, yeah.
Life is not based in a physical realm. Life is an absolute state of being, an absolute state of awareness. It's what humans have struggled with in religion for as long as religion has been assigned to an individual God that seems to not surprisingly, always have characteristics that are human: hateful, vengeful, spiteful, contemptful.
Do you believe that quartz has great energy? You know how people love quartz and the powers of. Do you think there's energy in those type of rock formations?
Anthony, I don't. If there is, there is. I would say there's energy throughout the entire universe.
Yeah.
So I don't need to figure it out between one thing and another thing and this thing and that thing. And I don't do that. I don't spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah.
I just know what I know is that things are as they are right now. That is a fact.
But you don't always
That,
know that, right? Sometimes you have to
no,
concentrate.
Anthony, if you just listen to me, I do always know that. And
Okay.
you always know that. You just think that it's an analytical debate because you think your brain is
Yeah.
your source of reality.
Yeah.
You think your thoughts are you. Now, to that degree, there's nothing wrong with that until we think it's right. That's where the wrong comes in. We can think that freely and also know that we're freely thinking that.
And I
But
know
when
my
we
brain
feel,
functions best if I give it broccoli and cauliflower, but I'm like, no, I want to give I think it wants cheese flavored Doritos is what my brain, right? It's like, where is that problem with it knowing, it's not supposed to eat Doritos, but you go, no, I'm going to eat Doritos today. It's that conflict.
all compulsions are death wishes, they're suicidal tendencies. We're trying to kill the life we've been given as a life form in the name of thinking we'll stop it from doing what it's doing as though it's independent from the choices we're making. We are the being making those choices. We are engaging that body at a level that is not healthy
Yeah.
and asking it then to do unhealthy things so we can get rid of it sooner than later, rather
And
than
that's what
come
your
to.
show is about, right? You want to help people stop doing that. Is that right? What is the
Well, how
theme?
about right now, Anthony? How about you right now? You
That's
ask
what
for
I'm
attention.
concentrating on. Yeah.
You
I'm saying,
ask,
yeah.
no. You're jumping off to everyone else,
I like to think of others.
but you're really not. You're using them as a distraction to considering what you're doing.
Spoiler alert, you're really not.
You have an impact on everyone already. What's the impact you have? Are you happy with the impact you have? Are you satisfied? Are you content with that? Does it seem to be meaningful enough to see people getting the benefits that you have to offer that we all share and participate in? If you're not, you're probably feeling sorrow and mourning and grief and loss and hiding those things and making believe if you become desensitized and numb to those things, that those things aren't there. But numbness is actually in a body an indication of pain, just like pain is an indication of something that is wrong. That's how our body tells us
Are you
when we
saying I'm not
can't.
authentic?
Our body gives us information to help guide us in a direction of health and survival and thriving. That's what our instincts actually are. Just like earlier, if we're basing our thoughts on reality being our thinking, we've got it backward. And so our instincts become death wishes. That isn't instinctual in our body. That becomes instinctual in the thing we think we are, the persona we think we are, the ego we think we are that we don't want to even admit we are. We think of it as independent. Interesting that we would think of ego as independent from us, operating against us, and not notice that we are aware that this isn't something we want anything to do with and yet continue to maintain it. That's the insanity of it. It's like the drinking of alcohol, the snorting of coke, meth, all those things that we do thinking that the addict would do, somebody addicted to it would do, and use it as an excuse that they can't do anything else. No other choice here but to continue. It's the exact same thing. And because all of those other things, compulsions, addiction, symptoms, are all based in one mental problem. Obsessive thinking is an indication of trying to turn a thought into reality when thoughts are designed to express existing reality, just like we think we make reality and manifest reality, when in fact reality is already 100% whole right now, always has been, always will be. And we can transform it and we can deform it as a form of transformation. That's what we can do. We can influence the existing reality to be and do different things or become different things. And human history has not been it's been a great example of how we have created things that seem to be immediately needed and yet have long-term consequences to them that are denied for decades and decades and decades as they get worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point that we constantly seem to be at the face of something we have no idea how to resolve. Nuclear weapons, plastic. I mean, there's so many of these instances. Dependence on oil as a toxin, pollutant, all of those things. We're asking for the problems we're creating to give our own experience the attention, the perspective that we're unwilling to offer in the denial and the defense and the defiance that we tend to maintain within the obsessive thinking, that all we are is what we think. And it's very common to hear people say, well, I'm only human. Is sort of that last ditch excuse that we have nothing else to do with it than just act on these paltry, absolutely sick basis of a self that doesn't exist. Self-centeredness is giving credit to the self having a center.
And just to make a note, though, for the last 200 years, it's been working pretty well, right? It doesn't sound very good, but we've accomplished a lot in 200 years.
Yeah, I mean, we've never been
I
at
was
greater
just
risk of
kidding, kind of,
annihilating
right?
but think of the things that we're in the face of.
I know.
You can see the problems around the world, and you can see the same sort of mania going on in the brains of people who think they are in charge and nobody else matters, but broad commitments to saying everybody else is going to be great if they're just given the freedom to do whatever they want. You know, ultimately, if we actually did what we wanted, we would be doing the right thing all the time, and the right thing would be the beneficial thing and the healthy thing and the thing that everybody else would say immediately, oh, I can do that.
And
I
it's
can
a little
plant
bit
that.
painful to do that. Not everybody wants to hear the truth, believe it or not. Your friends aren't really wild about knowing the truth.
Well, they can't deny the truth to begin with. They already know it, and that's the problem. To think that all we are is what we think is to make believe we don't know the truth. And we've created this entire landscape of justification and rationalization to claim things that, again, are not true. So we live in a narrative that is basically a story of humanity that we make believe is true, and it isn't. Cultures exist on that basis largely. Ideas that seem to distinguish one group against another group, or one in favor or opposed, and that group is happier to have those things for them because it identifies them. And what does it identify but their isolation and disconnection from the other groups? That's the source of how war has been fought all through history.
You probably don't
Maybe.
even identify with the mirror, right, Chuck? Like, I have a problem with the mirror. It's not right.
I don't know what you're
Well, I mean, I know my
aiming
personality
at.
as a kid. Like, you're talking about denial. Like, you're saying, no, they know that. Like, when you're in denial, you don't know you're in denial. That's when it's great. It's when you
Of course
realize
you
that.
do. Of course you do. You're conflicted, you're anxious, you're reactive, you're impulsive, you're compulsive. All of those conditions are obvious to us. And to think then of those as our personality is to think how quickly we assimilate these things as being who we are, when the basis of that whole thought is coming from thinking is our only reality. We're trying to infill it with all that stuff. We know exactly what we're doing. We're acting like we don't because we're thinking within the confines of
I don't think
thinking
you
and
can make
thinking.
that statement. And that's the problem. I think that's too general.
I just made it, Anthony.
No, and I have a problem with it. I don't think you're using your word. I don't think everybody, you're saying everybody. I don't think that's true.
No, I'm not saying everybody. I'm saying everybody and everything. All of it. Absolutely. 100% of the time. The entirety of existence is based on an absolute state of essence. All of it. Everything we can think of and everything we can't even imagine. Whatever it is right now, it is.
What's your
However,
definition of essence?
well, let's look it up.
Somebody, I was just kind of, that was my
I
dad
would,
telling me to, right? That's a way to distract. Like, I don't really care, but I am curious.
well, it's worth noting
Yeah,
the
it is
words. The
kind of
words are
important, right? The essence. What is the definition of essence?
permanent as contrasted with the element of being, accidental
Wow,
element of being.
that's heavy.
Accidental, listen to that, permanent. the individual, real, or ultimate nature of a thing, especially as opposed to its existence, as though it's separate.
Can you read that again?
Essence,
It's so great. One more, I apologize, but it's so incredible.
the permanent as contrasted with the accidental element of being. Meaning
That
it's
man, that's
essential.
incredible.
It's not a becoming.
Yeah, that's
It's
incredible.
essential. The individual, real, or ultimate nature of a thing, especially as opposed to its existence. Thinking about it is separate.
Wow.
The properties or attributes by means of which something can be placed in its proper class or identified as being what it is.
Wow.
So an essence of a plant would be the essence of that plant. But the essence of what allows that plant is the sunlight and the air and the earth, and all of the elements come into play, all of them everywhere simultaneously, because none of them are separate from the whole.
Would it bother you to read it one more time? It was so, I mean, that's got to be the greatest thing I've ever heard.
I'm going to let you do that.
Right. Can I interject for a second and get way
Please.
off subject?
Please.
See, and when you say please, Jack, I want you to know that hurts my feelings. Just to
Right,
throw that
and-
out.
Good.
Right.
Good.
And that's what I want
what-
to talk about. And that's what I want to.
At
what
least
I want
know
you
have
to know-
feelings. I have feelings.
What I want you to know, Anthony, is that when you think I'm hurting your feelings, you're
Yeah.
finally becoming aware of the feelings you have. that
Yeah, at
hurt.
least I have feelings. It's like, yeah, that feels good. I have
No.
feelings to hurt.
So,
Mark.
yes. Anthony, thank you for coming today.
Yeah, right. That's okay. Let's say that. And that's
Please,
wrap
Anthony,
up the show.
please let me talk for a second. You hit the nail on the head when you again, and I'm sorry, I'm talking about you and not me, and
I'm
trying
not.
to.
Let's hear it.
I associate with you, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, like when you just told Jack, I don't care what your answer was. That is so true. And please just listen for a second. You know, like as uncomfortable that Gabe is, I can't even imagine, or I can imagine, because as uncomfortable as Gabe is, that is just a fraction as uncomfortable as you are. Gabe isn't uncomfortable with what you're saying. Gabe is just picking up on your uncomfortableness.
Yes.
Okay. Again, this is, and it's when you just said, you know, I know Jack has asked you in the past to go back and listen to yourself on the recordings. I don't know if you've done that. It's been great, beneficial for me. You know, like it's when you say, I don't care, it was definitely true. You did not, you were already on to the next question and the next deflecting. Then before Jack had even finished his answer to you, it was, you know, it's so painful. You just cannot look at it.
And then I was right. And then it turns out it was the greatest thing ever, is the funny part. Like, I was like, why am I wasting all this time? I'm like, because
there's nothing funny about it. I mean, and that is where, because we think the joke is on us at that point. So we need to make it funny. You know? And again, I see myself so much in you and your struggle and things that I'm going through right now. I just want to recommend go back and listen to this, and maybe you can see at a certain point, like, oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable, and I'm deflecting it, I'm changing it, I'm doing everything I can to not continue to actually, like you said, I don't like to be uncomfortable. You know?
Well, yeah,
so
but
again,
then also too, I don't want to make other people. This was going to be my last, because
right,
but
and that's why I started with saying, please, you know, like this isn't about it. Again, you don't want to come back because you feel the joke is on you.
well, yeah,
Right. So
obviously.
Anthony, come here or not, you will make other people uncomfortable. You won't make them uncomfortable, but what you do will help them notice their discomfort. And to think of that as something you want to stop is once again thinking from addiction of stopping the effect and not being willing to, what Mark's saying, really look at the cause, really start to say, wow, I really am the cause. I'm at the center of this cause that I keep instigating in all of these new ways, and think that one of the new ways is finally going to pay off, when the root of those new ways, there's no payment due, there's no credit due, there's nothing due whatsoever, because it's baseless in thought thinking. It's thoughtlessness attempting to create thoughtfulness out of nothing. There's nothing there. And even within the context of nothing in the universe, nothing actually provides the space for everything to happen. Nothing becomes something profound. When we're talking about non-existence, that isn't even nothing. That's insanity posing as reality. It's never going to be real. It doesn't matter how much we do with it, how long we do it. And it's going with you wherever you go, whether you come here or not, talk about it or not, do all the things you think you're going to calculate to be hidden from it. Mark's offering you some insight because Mark
Well,
knows.
Mark is the reason. Like, I'm like, after I want people to say, I really didn't understand how this whole program works, but after hearing you share, it all made sense to me.
It's not a program, though, Anthony. It's just a discussion about reality and truth, and seeing that we already have the information we keep seeming to search for. You say you don't care, and to your point, Mark, I'll add, the caring you have is so great that you feel like you have to discount it because you can't seem to find a place for it, because you're constantly thinking about it from thinking rather than knowing. The care we have for each other is great. The consideration we have for each other is great. The practical, functional incapacity is distracting us from realizing, is giving us a chance to make believe that we're distracted sufficiently from giving credit to that and saying, you know what, I do actually. I used to think I didn't care, and I realized I cared so much I just didn't know what to do with it. I was heartbroken over my inability to communicate honestly and actually get anything out of my mouth that resembled anything close to honesty about what I was simply thinking. Right or wrong doesn't have to be either for me to state what I'm thinking when I'm thinking it. I don't have to be right. I can be wrong. And honesty is not about right or wrong. It's about stating the facts of what's happening now. They don't have to be right. I don't have to be right to be able to say that. There's a lot of freedom in coming to
You
terms
just
with
said
that.
honesty is not about right or wrong. Is that really
Right.
true? Honesty is not about right or wrong?
If I am lying and I am honest about lying, what happens? Boom, I'm no longer lying.
Boom.
So if I am the context that Mark's referring to, the thinking about thinking and that being who we are, is always trying to be right. We've created narratives as humans that give us impressions. The only thing we can say is what's right. We constantly have to fight for people to agree with what is right for us, rather than realize that is not accurate. Largely what we think is wrong. If we're
And I
not
have to
thinking it.
apologize to Mark because Mark was actually feeling sorry for me, right? I'm such a fucking, like Mark was going, I feel so sorry for you, Anthony, for the struggle, right? I've turned it
No,
into
I was identifying with you. I wasn't feeling sorry for you. I was
Oh, okay.
identifying with you.
Oh,
The
okay.
same
Mark,
with
the
the
reason
same
I
with
love you because I wasn't going to come back anymore unless somebody said, like, you're that person to me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's why I'm here. We need that, right?
that's called codependency.
And I love
From
that. You shake an alcoholic family tree, and a codependent falls out.
So when Gabe said what Gabe said, Anthony, it's
Well,
because
after I made
Gabe,
him, Gabe didn't say it. Gabe was just, I want to hear
no,
Gabe yell at me.
Gabe,
Like, let's go.
Anthony, Gabe made a comment, and Gabe is referring to his experience of his experience of you. He can relate to those things to be able to comment on those things. I relate to those things. I do those things.
And I heard it that I'm hurting his ears and he fell asleep. That's where I'm at.
Yeah,
Right?
but if his ears are hurting, whose business do you think his ears are? Yours?
Yes.
Really? So when he's a mile away from you and listening to something, you should be hearing
The
that?
only reason I'm here is because of Gabe, Mark, Harry, and you. If you know what I mean, that's all. If I'm not making 50% of you happy, I'm out.
What job do you have to make us happy? You have no edict in that regard.
Well, I know when I'm not. I've been kicked out of better places. Let me tell you that.
You know why you know what you're not wanted, Anthony, is because
Yeah, tell me.
you
That's the
think
key to know when you're not wanted, right?
you think who you are is something that you absolutely hate and loathe, and no should not exist.
And this is the best it's ever been. That's the scary part. The best it's ever been is not good enough. But I want to hear from Harry. What is up, Harry? Are you just monitoring this? Are you taking a course like mental? I'm here for the mental obsession course.
Oh, I'm here.
Harry has,
You are teaching it.
I can also relate to you, Anthony.
Yes, that's what I want to hear. Otherwise, I'm gone. Like when I
but
tell you
that's-
about hell, when you tell me about hell, I don't want it to be something I read in a dictionary. I know what I know what you're talking about, buddy.
Yeah, at some point, I think it was a few months ago when you just were talking about just things that made no sense. You sounded like my mind when I'm very
Right. Well,
anxious.
that hasn't changed much.
But yeah, but I can also relate. Yeah,
Tell us,
and I'm here
Harry.
listening.
I wish I could be silent. Like I want to hear what you're. I don't want to hear me. I want to hear you.
Anthony,
Oh, no.
We can
you
take
actually
care of that,
would,
Anthony.
Anthony, you want to be doing exactly what you're doing.
No, I
Exactly
don't. It's the loot. It's
exactly.
my brain. It's
Think
not
about
me.
this. You are choosing it and then claiming not to want it. Think of the conflict there. Think of the anxiety there. Think
Do
of
you have
the
a problem with?
compulsion.
It sounds like you have a problem with conflict, Jack.
No, I don't. I use conflict as a
It's a sword. You
experience.
use conflict as a sword.
No, I use conflict as an awareness that I am thinking thoughts. I'm not
You
thinking.
thrive on conflict.
You can re-listen to what I just said about that.
You don't thrive on conflict?
I don't think there's any thriving in conflict. I think there's thriving in interrelations, not interreaction.
All I know is when I
Interreaction.
go to try to get the job and they're interviewing me, I go, I thrive on conflict. They're like, okay, when can you start? Right? Who thrives on conflict? Do you thrive on conflict, Harry?
I don't think so.
Conflict's been the whole part of your life, hasn't it, Harry? Or no? Am I in the wrong group? Isn't conflict the whole problem here, Harry?
What do you mean?
Conflict is my whole. I'm putting a finger. Like the reason I'm unhappy is because everything's a fucking conflict. Conflict. You don't have conflict in your life.
Oh, I stopped doing that a while ago.
How? How did you
And
stop conflicting? Tell me, please.
just listen to yourself.
That's the problem. I'm saying I want to not have conflict.
It's like every time I was very anxious, I was looking for ways to escape, to just get away from my thoughts. Anything that would just make me angry.
So
Or
you
just
had conflict, right? That's what you had conflict.
but everything stopped once I started to see things. When I started to see what really was going on.
And you
Maybe
don't
just
have any
me.
more conflict. There's no more conflict in your life.
Oh, there is, but I know I see the signs.
Like what is
Like
what is a conflict you have? What's a daily conflict you have?
when I woke up today, when I actually in the
Yeah,
morning,
there you go.
I
When
got
you
up.
woke up today. That's it. That's what I'm saying. That's Harry. Not I don't know what
Anthony, you ask a question. Let him
Yeah,
finish his question, his answer. If you're really
yeah.
interested, maybe you want to
because
hear
he
it.
was saying he doesn't have conflict. Then he says when he woke up, he has
Anthony. No, all you're doing is trying to fight for your supposition to be true and all the bits and pieces you're going to take out of. You're not listening to what he's saying. You're listening to what you think he's saying so that you can continue to support the contention of being here only to argue in favor of that loop of thinking you're doing and then claim you don't want conflict.
Amen.
Listen to what he's saying.
it
You
was
might
too,
hear
it was
something.
funny until the last part, but yeah, you're right. Sorry, Harry.
No, I go through this a lot. I mean, every day, but now I'm able to see things, embrace things that are that used to bother me. But it's just like any other day. Now I'm not able to stop it, but I'm able to see things and not let my mind take me for a ride. Where I would just my mind would just give me an image, and then I would just create a story, and then I would just hurting myself. And I would do those things. I would just create. I would just make me anxious, and then after that, of course, just I would just feel stressed out because I couldn't change things, and then I just. But I know very well not to do that anymore.
So, Harry, I'm going to use some words that you didn't use, but to describe what I hear you saying, and correct me or refine it. But you're saying your mind had an image, created an image, okay, and your mind is really your brain, right?
Yes.
So within your brain, you had an image. That brains are designed. Thoughts are basically images. They're imagining things. They're taking what they're seeing and coming up with, what is this? How do I utilize this? What's good and bad for me about this? What's the best decision I can make about this? That process is natural. And then you would start thinking, this shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be having that. Or you would start thinking, I'm going to develop this narrative. I'm going to create a story with it. I'm going to go deeper into it. I'm going to start to assign myself as that's my new reality. Now that image has become me. Now it's become my life. Now it's become something I control, some reality I've created. And all of a sudden wonder why you felt conflicted.
Yeah, I know. I don't do that anymore. I mean, I
Yes.
see it now. I see
But
it now
that's what
because
you were seeing. That's what you were doing.
I know.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I just needed to finish the story. And, and then if I wouldn't finish it, I would become very anxious.
Right.
And then of course there's an infinity. There's like infinite outcomes. So I would just create a story, finish it, and be like, well, there might be another. I mean, it wouldn't stop. I would just
Right.
spend hours, sometimes days, just with that same story, and that was very stressful. I was very anxious, stressful, and but now I see it. I mean, as soon as I see it, the image in my mind, I would just okay, that's an image. Either I go for a ride or just let it be.
And feeling the stress is also telling you that you're doing something that's causing it.
Or is it possible, Harry? Let me suggest this. Can you go for a ride and let it be?
I just asked him a question. Let
Sorry.
him answer, please.
Sorry.
What was that again, Jack?
Something about the story. Sorry.
The anxiety and the stress was actually telling you, the conflict is actually telling you what you're doing.
Yes, I know.
You're starting to read it. It's like a book you're reading, the story you're reading, and you're saying, oh, it has conflict in the story and all that. It must be thinking about thinking that's conflicted.
Yeah, now I see the signs. Like
Yeah.
Even today when I woke up in the morning, I was telling you, just a little bit of pain in my neck. I was like, okay, anxiety right away. I was like, okay, because I was overthinking. As soon as I woke up, and then before, and I knew what was happening before I went to sleep. I was overthinking too as well too. So I have to just embrace it and be honest with myself.
And we tend to think of other people as pains in our neck.
Yeah.
That term is used that way.
Yes,
when the pain in my neck is coming from the thinking I'm doing about those other people, it's not coming from those other people. They aren't insisting on it. And there is nothing that I ever do that anyone forces me to. It's all a function of my choice.
Yeah. And then it took me, sometimes I'm just silent because I have to digest what you're saying sometimes. It sometimes takes me a day, 2 days, a week.
Me too.
But I used to just, because at some point I'm like, okay, I think I know better. I've been through this, but I know,
Yeah.
I know. But now I listen. I have to listen.
I can hear it in your voice too. When you said this 3 weeks ago and you were on camera, I was like, fuck, I want what that guy, what the hell is he taking? Right?
Yeah, so, but I used to overreact. Even like I told
No,
you,
I
when
want to hear you still
yeah.
do. I don't want to hear you used to. That's scary. Like when you say,
Anthony,
yeah,
why don't you listen to what he's saying? Why don't you give him enough room to say what he's saying? Think about the insistence you have to try to tailor what he's saying before you're going to end up remapping it in your own thinking anyhow. Why not allow him to say what he's saying and just listen to it? He's telling you listening's important, and what you're doing is talking over the opportunity you're having to listen. You don't have
yeah,
to do
haven't you?
it. You can
Yeah,
interrupt him.
haven't you ever been married before?
Who, me?
No, teasing, Jack. Listen, Harry, what I'm
Oh,
saying is that you're right, man. You're right. So,
yeah, but sometimes I used to overreact like you, Anthony. I would just, but it was either that way or this way, and I chose this way.
what's this way?
Oh, just overreacting. Like I used to argue with my brothers, even when I knew they were right. There was a possibility that I could be right too, but
Well, that's when you argue the most. It's at the the
yeah,
most painful is when they tell
but I
you.
was wrong. I was wrong. So once I embraced that, I was like, oh wow, there's no more tension. There's no more arguing.
There's no
And
fight and right.
yes,
It
There's no
works.
fighting wrong.
Well, there is if you think it's right.
No, there's no fight. You don't have to fight.
It isn't a function of not having to. It's a function that when you think it's right, you're creating a fight that you are committed to maintaining. You wouldn't think wrong is right if you weren't ready to fight. That is
Right.
the
No, I agree.
contention of that's conflict right there. That's the inducement of the conflict. It isn't natural. Everything's already interacting. Whether things are interreacting is a function of choice.
Well, do you ever talk to yourself, Harry? Like a voice, like you say, "Hey, Harry, you should do this," or do you hear your voice?
uh, not anymore. But
Not
yeah,
anymore. I'm calling bullshit. That voice is still there.
I know she's
But
still there,
Anthony,
but yeah, I mean,
the
but I'm able
difference
to see it. Yeah.
the
Yeah, you're
difference
able to
is
see it. That's the difference.
the difference is he thinks to his thinking. He speaks to his thinking rather than thinks it's himself. He thinks about his thinking as thinking. There are
Now you're actually
voices in
talking
that.
for Harry. I'm saying that voice is
Well,
still there, right, Harry?
I've
No,
known Harry a little.
actually, Jack is right. Yeah, now I speak to my thinking. I don't let my thinking think for itself.
That's
Yeah,
what
it
I
doesn't.
want to
Yeah.
say. Like
Well,
yeah, I don't let my thinking.
actually, contemplation is allowing thinking to think about itself. That's
Yes,
an advantage that we have as
yes,
a species that no other species that we're aware of has. Now, I would suggest that animals also do this to a smaller degree. They all have preferences. They all do things a little differently than each other. So there's some variation in the traits and maybe the choices they make. But for us, for sure, we can think about our thinking. We can think about death. We can think about birth. We can think about life. We can think about things in contemplative forms that we don't have to think of as conflicts. To imagine that our thinking is thinking about thinking itself is to imagine that we can create more and more thinking about what we're thinking. And
right,
the
exactly,
overthinking is when I think I can't do anything about it
right.
because it now is operating apart from me rather than I'm asking for some insight and perspective into why is it that I'm unable to function in some way? Why is
Yes,
it that I feel depreciated in some way? Why is it that I don't seem to feel the bounty and the glory of the magnificence that we're
yes.
all interacting with?
Why do they keep kicking me out of these clubs, Harry? So tell me, you're my coach. I'm saying, Harry, I hate my life. I'm not happy. How would you talk me out of this? You're my coach. What do you say, Anthony? What do I do? Silence. That's it. The key.
What
You just listen. Exactly. Thank you, Harry.
Anthony,
what
you continue to think there's an answer, but you just continually resist in noticing
There
that you
is an
are
answer.
the
I guarantee you there's an answer.
Anthony.
Yes.
You continue to ask other people to give you an answer while you continue to resist noticing you are the cause of the problem you are asking them to
Welcome to
solve.
my world. So, Harry,
Well,
coach me. What is
it
it?
isn't it's our world.
Welcome to our world. So, tell me, Harry, what do you coach? What is the secret? What do you do?
or you just need to find yourself. Look what goes back to you.
Exactly, right?
It took me a while. It took me, but I've been listening. I've
No,
been
I'm
listening.
saying that
Yeah.
that's the secret. How do you find yourself?
Well, apparently you don't, Anthony.
I know, but how do you just find yourself? How do you just
It isn't
find?
lost. There's nowhere to go and no place to find it.
Is that true, Harry?
You cannot lose something that can't be lost.
What if you never had it though?
Then you wouldn't exist. You would never have the thought as to
Right.
why and how you can fix it.
You just have to find yourself.
You're not lost. The
I didn't hear him say that. I just said
the
you have to find
lost cause is your idea, Anthony, that you're going to launch off on some new analytical, thoughtless tirade
I
and
like it.
figure it out within that context and keep wondering why it seems so hard to get an answer that you're willing to even listen to once you ask. You don't want the answer. You know what the answer is. It's useless. There's nothing that's going to be said that's going to keep you from doing what you choose to continue to do. Nobody's ever going to give you that information.
I don't believe you. I think you're wrong.
I know you do. I know you don't, and I know you do.
And if you wouldn't be arguing if you didn't think, you only argue about things you're not sure of.
I'm not arguing. I'm pointing out. I'm giving you my observation as something you could consider, not something I require you to agree with or believe in. I've said that multiple times.
Who do you think knows more about denial, you or me? Okay, you do. I'm sorry.
The point of this conversation is to talk about knowing as an absolute state of being and to dissect it into try and figure out all of the other irrational, insane ideas that we have is just another example of how addicted we are to these ideas that we think will someday become true the longer we continue to focus on them and act as though it's fun to actually investigate that. It's a waste of time, which is why we call so much of what we do shit. We have shit to do, get shit together, holy shit. All these terms are reflections of our awareness that we know the time we're spending is wasted on asking for answers to questionable questions that we're not listening to the answer to anyhow. We do not want to hear what we already know. And so we can blame it on other people for not saying it right, not doing it right, for having all the faults we don't want to admit.
Is that what you're saying I'm doing? I get a feel like what I'm saying is that Harry is like, I know more about denial than I've never met anybody that knows more about it. So when you start telling me about denial, I say, I got to call bullshit. When you say denial doesn't work, it's like, obviously he doesn't know how to use it. Have you ever used denial, Harry?
All right, it's a 10:45, guys. I'm gonna take off. I appreciate everybody. Everybody have a peaceful weekend.
Thanks for
Mark.
coming, Mark, and contributing. And we're at the end of our time too. So we can continue this next week or in between.
Well, actually, no, I'm kind of, I don't, the only reason I came on here is to apologize and say, I don't want to, I'm more happy when I'm not arguing. Like you guys don't understand. Yeah.
So you've done that.
Yeah. And I apologize for making you mad.
You didn't make me mad, Anthony.
Yes, I did. You're not even say yes. It's not hard to say, yeah, you did. Is that a problem? Yeah, you made me mad. Who fucking cares? I don't care.
Anthony, I have anger about things that I have not expressed, about things that I have denied.
That's called being mad. We call that
I
being
have anger about things that I am deficient in communicating.
Yeah.
I have all of those things that are all consequences of my own doing. You do not make me mad or anyone mad.
I think I do.
I can be irritated, but the irritations are my own limitations. They have nothing to do with you when they are predominantly the things I am doing. So I'm not going to give you that credit, and you can feel how you want about it.
You know what I mean?
You
That's
can
what it's
feel how
about.
you
I want
want.
credit for
You can
everything.
feel how you want about it. That's
Yeah,
your
but
job.
I appreciate everything you did for me, but I just, I don't want to do this. The hard part is to come on and say, hey, it's not working, right? Anybody could just go, oh, I'm not going to talk to anybody anymore. But I'm saying this is not my goal to say that denial, like when I hear someone say denial doesn't work, I'm like, obviously they don't know what denial is.
Well,
Denial is,
Anthony, insanity feeds on insanity, and you're welcome to pursue that line. Look at the world, and you'll see a lot of people thinking that way, and you are in good company in that regard. Though I would say it's sick company, and your coming here is not an indication of you wanting to continue to do that exclusively, but there's some ray of interest in starting to notice that maybe what you're doing isn't the best and only thing you can do. And I know that from our conversations. But languishing in that to me is not my interest. I have many, many other things to do that I feel are much more productive than trying to figure out. There's enough of that going on for everybody to witness. You don't have to
right.
come here and help everybody understand that.
That's what I realized. That's the key, right? I thought it's my responsibility to bring up like what they're really thinking. I'm like, no, they could, you know what I mean? I don't need to take you out of denial. If you like denial, that's great. It's not my job.
All right. Thank you guys very much for being
All right,
here
love
and
you guys.
participating.
Thanks, Harry.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Gabe.
Thank you.